Now that we've looked at some of the information on how a verb is composed, let's take some examples from exercise 5 in section 10 of your grammars and learn how to parse verbs. When we parse a verb, we will be giving the tense of the verb, the voice, the mood, the person, and the number. All of the verbs that we'll be parsing right now and in exercise 5 will be active voice verbs, and they will all be indicative mood. So turn now to exercise 5. And you will notice that following exercise 5, there is an answer sheet. I'll set these aside and write these words out in a larger format so they'll be easier for you to see. Turn also to page 341 in your grammar. And on page 3-41, you see me standing before the board there telling you how to parse an indicative verb. There are 8 steps. I want you to learn these steps. Learn them in order. And don't skip the steps. If you follow these steps, you will learn very quickly how to parse. The first step on parsing an indicative verb is to ask the question, what is the lexical entry? Now, this may be a difficult step at first until you have learned more vocabulary words. But for right now, we'll simply concentrate on the verb luo, I break. The next step is to ask, is there an augment? The reason that that's an important question to ask is that if there is an augment, then that limits us to 3 tenses in the indicative mood which can show past time, the augment telling us past time. Those 3 tenses are the imperfect, the aorist, or the pluperfect. And actually, for our purposes right now in this course, we're not going to concern ourselves with the pluperfect. So if we see an augment in front of a verb, then we know that that verb is either the imperfect indicative or the aorist indicative. This would also be a good place to stop and say something more about the indicative mood. It's only in the indicative mood that time is an element. Time is not an element in the imperative, the subjunctive, the optative, the participle, or the infinitive. It is only in the indicative where time is of consideration. And those tenses which show past time are, again, the imperfect, the aorist, and the pluperfect. If you would like a little later, you may turn to section 5 in your grammar on page 5-3. You'll see a paradigm there explaining which tenses show which time framework. The present time, or the here and now time, is explained by the present tense, perfect tense. And of course, the future time is expressed by the future tense. So if there is an augment, then we know that we're dealing with one of the past time tenses in the indicative mood, the imperfect, the aorist, or the pluperfect. And for right now, as I say, we can forget the pluperfect. The page to 3-42 and look at step number 3. The next thing we will ask of the verb is, what is the personal ending? By identifying the personal ending, you can tell what the person and the number of the verb is, and you will also be able to tell the voice of the verb. Active endings are different from middle and passive voice endings. And for right now, we'll simply be dealing with the active indicative endings. Number 4, step 4. What is the connecting vowel? The more that you deal with the connecting vowels, the more that you'll see that it is important for you to learn which connecting vowels are in front of which endings. That'll take you some time to learn. Step 5, is there a tense indicator? Now, we have seen that there are 3 tenses that we have looked at so far where there is a tense indicator. The future has a tense indicator of sigma. The first aorist has a tense indicator of sigma. And the perfect has a tense indicator of a kappa. There are other tense indicators, but those are the ones with which we have dealt so far. Step number 6, what is the tense stem? At this point, since we're not dealing with any irregular verbs, we will only be concerned with the present tense stem of the verb. Remember, we have already discovered how we find tense stem of a verb. We take the lexical entry, we take the personal ending and the connecting vowel and knock those off of the end of the lexical entry, and what we are left with is the present tense stem of the verb. Step number 7, we put all of this foregoing information together, and then we parse the verb in terms of voice, mood, person, and number. T, V, M, P, N. Tense, voice, mood, person, and number. And then in step 8, after parsing the verb, try to give a provisional translation. Now, simply a suggested translation. For the translation that we would ultimately come up with is totally dependent upon context. Now, I'm going to be referring to pages 3-41 and 3-42 as we parse indicative verb forms found in exercise 5. The first example in exercise 5 is the verb elusate. All right, as we parse this verb, the first step is to ask, what is the lexical entry? Well, for all of these forms, numbers 1 through 53 on exercise 5, the verb is the verb luo. So that's our lexical entry, luo. And by the way, as we look at this lexical entry, what is the present tense stem of this verb? Okay, how do we present tense stem? We take the lexical entry, we take the personal ending, and we remove it. And what we're left with is the present tense stem of the verb. Step number 2, is there an augment? As you look at this verb form, elusate, can you hear the augment in front of the verb elusate? Yes, there is an augment. And if there is an augment, we know that we're dealing with the indicative mood. Why do we know that we're dealing with the indicative mood if there is an augment? Well, because only in the indicative is time an element. And if that augment is showing us past time, then we know we are in the indicative mood. Not the subjunctive, not the imperative, not the optative, not the participle, nor the infinitive. If there is an augment, then we're dealing with the indicative mood, and it's showing one of the past tenses, one of the past time tenses. And what are those three tenses with past time in the indicative mood? The imperfect, the aorist, and the pluperfect. Forget pluperfect. All right, so we've narrowed the parsing of this verb down to it being indicative mood and either an imperfect, aorist, or pluperfect tense. And since we're not worrying about pluperfect, we could say that it is either imperfect or aorist. Turn the page to 3-42. Step 3. What is the personal ending? Well, how would you know what the personal ending is on the back of this verb? Remember a little earlier, we looked at our various verb forms on pages 3-14 and following, or the detailed paradigms of our verbs on page 3-23. Or you can see a summary of these endings on page 3-16. There are a number of places where the endings are given to you in this grammar, and you do need to commit these endings to memory. So if you, just for the sake of this exercise, look at page 3-16. All of the endings are given to you graphically here. Find the ending that is spelled with a TE or a tau epsilon on the end. Well, set 1 has those endings, has that ending with an epsilon connecting vowel, but we have an alpha connecting vowel in front of this one. Set 2 also has this tau epsilon ending, but there's also an epsilon connecting vowel. Set 3, there we go. Set 3 has the ending tau epsilon with an alpha connecting vowel in front of the ending. So we see that this ending tau epsilon is a second person plural ending. I'll just abbreviate that by saying 2P, second person plural. Now, we've also identified the connecting vowel is an alpha connecting vowel. And we also, this ending, tau epsilon, is what voice? Well, according to our chart, it tells us that it is an active voice. This is an active voice ending. And that's all we've learned right now anyway. The middle or passive endings will be different. Now what you could do is to look at the detailed times, or, which by the way are on page 323 following, or go back and look at the summary of the paradigms on 3-14. It may be a little easier to see them there. Find which one of these verb forms of luo is spelled like this. Well, if there is an augment out front, we had decided that this is either going to be imperfect or first aorist. As we see an alpha connecting vowel and we see a sigma tense indicator, then we know that this verb is a first aorist. And I'm just going to abbreviate that A-O-R, aorist. Look on page 3-17 and following. Here you see all of the tenses of luo laid out before you. Look at 3-18, and there's the first aorist tense. You notice that the first aorist has a sigma tense indicator. The imperfect does not. And it is also the first aorist that has this alpha connecting vowel, whereas the imperfect has an epsilon connecting vowel. Now go back to page 3-41. And let's go over the steps again. I went through them a little too quickly, but let's slow this down and look at this again. Number one, what is the lexical entry of this verb? The lexical entry is the verb luo. Number two, is there an augment? Yes, there is an augment. And if there is an augment, then we know that we are in indicative mood. Why? Only in the indicative is time an element. Also, we know that we're dealing with one of three tenses which can show past time in the indicative mood. That would be the imperfect, the aorist, or the pluperfect. And we're not worrying about pluperfect right now, so either this would be the imperfect or the aorist. Turn the page to -42. Number three, what is the personal ending? The personal ending is te. And what person and number is this personal ending? It is second plural, 2p. Step number four, what is the connecting vowel? The connecting vowel here is an alpha. Step number five, is there a tense indicator? Yes, there is a tense indicator, the sigma right here. What is the tense stem? The tense stem is the present tense stem. How did we get the present tense stem? We take our lexical entry of the verb, we remove the personal ending, and what we're left with is a tense stem. Putting all of this information together, with the augment, with the sigma tense indicator, an alpha connecting vowel, and this personal ending, we have the aorist, active, indicative, second plural. The aorist is the tense, active is the voice, indicative is the mood. Second plural would be the person and the number. TVMPN, tense, voice, mood, person, and number. Okay, let's do another one. Let's do number 4 in exercise 5. Elusamen. Elusamen. Step number 1. What is the lexical entry? The lexical entry is the verb luo. Step number 2. Is there an augment? Is there an augment here? Yes, there is. And if there is an augment, then the first thing we know is that this verb is indicative. I'll just abbreviate that with an I. We also know that this limits us to one of 3 tenses, which show past in the indicative mood, either the imperfect, the aorist, or the pluperfect. Step number 3. What is the personal ending? The personal ending here is men, and that is first person plural. We also know that that is an active ending. The reason we know that is that we memorized these active endings. Step number 4. What is the connecting vowel? The connecting vowel is an alpha. Well, already we could ask, of the 2 tenses, the imperfect or the aorist, which one has an alpha connecting vowel? Well, the aorist does. Step number 5 is tense indicator. Well, we see a sigma here, don't we? And we know that the sigma tense indicator would indicate aorist, not imperfect. Remember, the imperfect tense does not have a tense indicator. So now we have our parsing. To abbreviate aorist, I'm simply going to put an A. Aorist, active, indicative, first plural. Now after we do this, we want to ask for a provisional translation. Go back to the verb that we did previously, elusate, and let's come up with a provisional translation of this verb. In English, we always start with the person and number, and the person and number of the elusate is second person plural. And second plural would be the word you, or y'all. All right, we have past time and aorist indicative. So second plural in past time would be you broke, or you have broken, or you did break. In the second verb that we did, which is number 4 on your exercise 5, elusamen. Let's translate this verb. Start with the first plural ending. The first plural is the word we. And again, we have some simple past time action here, making a statement, because the indicative mood makes a statement. So we, past time, broke, or we have broken, or we did break. Look now at number 9 on exercise 5. Elusen. Okay, what's the first step in parsing the verb? What does the first thing we ask? What is the lexical entry? What is the lexical entry of this verb, elusen? It's luo. This is kind of easy since we know that all of these up through number 53 are the luo. The next thing we ask is there an augment? Is there an augment in front of this verb elusen? Yes, there is. And if there is an augment, then we know that this verb is indicative. Why? Because the augment shows past time, and only in the indicative is time an element. We also know that this limits us to one of 3 tenses which can show past time, either the imperfect, the aorist, or the pluperfect. Forget pluperfect. Go now and ask, what is the personal ending? So we'll go to the back part of the verb. And what we see back here is not really an ending, epsilon connecting vowel and a movable nu. But we can think of this en, or epsilon nu ending, we can think of that as an ending, if you would like, at this point. And it is the third singular ending. And it is an active ending. How do we know it's active? That's what we have been learning. We have been learning as one of our active endings. The connecting vowel we have already identified as an epsilon. That was step 4. Step 5, is there a tense indicator? Yes, there is a sigma tense indicator. Well, of the 2 tenses, the imperfect or the aorist, which one has a sigma tense indicator? The aorist does, doesn't it? Well, there's our parsing. Aorist, active, indicative, third singular. Now let's come up with a provisional translation. Third singular would be he, she, or it. Simple past time. He, she, or it broke, or has broken, or did break. Okay, now, let's look at number 3 on exercise 5. The verb lusomen. Step number 1. What is the lexical entry? The lexical entry of the verb luo. Step number 2. Is there an augment? Well, do we see an epsilon out front? No. So there is no augment. So we know we're not dealing with past time. Well, what tenses would we be left with which do not deal with past time? Present, future, and perfect. If this were the perfect tense, what would we have to have out front? We would have to have reduplication. We'll see one of those in just a few moments. Go to the back part of the verb and let's identify the personal ending men. Well, that's a first plural ending. And we also, it is an active indicative ending. How do we know that? Because we have learned from the paradigms previously, as we have memorized the endings, that this men is an active indicative ending. What is the connecting vowel? It is an omicron. Is there a tense indicator? Yes, there is a sigma here. In the previous examples that we have seen, the sigma was an indicator for the aorist. But aorist is past time in the indicative, and we already know that we're not dealing with past time here. What other tense has a sigma tense indicator? Well, the future does, doesn't it? So now we can parse this verb, future, active, indicative, first plural. Let's come up with a provisional translation. Start with the first plural. We, and make it future time, will or shall break. We shall break. Look at number 6. Lucete. What's the first thing we ask of this verb? What is the lexical entry? What is the lexical entry? Luo. It's becoming pretty obvious now, isn't it? Okay. What's the next thing we ask? Is there augment? Is there an augment in front of this verb? No. So we know we're not dealing with one of the past time tenses. We would not be dealing with the imperfect, the aorist, or the pluperfect. We would be dealing either with the present, the future, or the perfect. If we were dealing with the perfect tense, we would have to see reduplication in front of this verb, and we do that. Number 3, what is the personal ending? We see the ending te, and we have learned that that's a second plural ending, that it is an active ending, and that it is an indicative ending. What is the connecting vowel? The connecting vowel is an epsilon. Is there a tense indicator? Yes, there is a sigma tense indicator. And between the present tense and the future tense, which is what we have essentially narrowed this verb down to, which one of those two, the present or the future, has a sigma tense indicator? Right, the future does. So the parsing of this verb is future, active, second plural. Now a provisional translation would be you plural, will break. You will break. Lucete. Look at number 2 on exercise 5. Luomen. All right. First thing we ask, What is the lexical entry? The lexical entry of this verb is luo. You see how your vocabulary knowledge is going to have to grow in order to be able to identify lexical entries. And it will. The more vocabulary words you experience and learn, the easier it will be to answer the question, what is the lexical entry? The next question we ask is there an augment? Is there an augment in front of this verb? No, there's not. So we know we're not dealing with the past time tense, imperfect, aorist, or pluperfect. We're dealing either with the present, future, or perfect. Is there a kind of reduplication in front of this verb to tell us that it's perfect tense? No. Okay, step 3. Let's go to the back part of the verb and identify our personal ending, men. What person and number is that? First plural. See, you've seen that enough now that you've pretty much got that memorized. And we've also memorized that that is an active ending. It's one of the indicative endings that we have learned. Step 4, what is the connecting vowel? The connecting vowel is an omicron. Step 5, is there a tense indicator? Do you see a tense indicator before this connecting vowel and after the verb stem? No. So of the two tenses, present and future, which one of those two wouldn't have a tense indicator? That's right, the present tense. So this verb is parsed present, active, indicative, first, plural. And let's translate, give a provisional translation of this verb. First plural is we. Present tense, we are breaking, or we break. Let's now look at number 5. Lelukamen. Lelukamen. Okay, the first step is to identify lexical entry. What is the lexical entry of this verb, lelukamen? Well, sure, by now we know it's luo. The next step we ask is there an augment? No, there is not an augment, but what do we see happening in front of this verb? Well, we see reduplication. Reduplication is where the initial consonant verb is repeated again up front. And we simply insert a little epsilon vowel for pronunciation. Le-lu. So we see reduplication here. And what tense have we learned so far shows reduplication? The perfect tense. Let's abbreviate that with P-E-R-F. Or you could abbreviate it PF, would be okay as well. Now let's go back to the back part of the verb and identify our personal ending. There is men again. Boy, we know that one now, don't we? First plural. We also know that it is an active indicative ending. Now we have the complete part already. But let's finish out the steps. What is the connecting vowel? The connecting vowel is an alpha. And is there a tense indicator? Well, yes, there is. You see the kappa there. And of the tenses that we have seen so far, which one has a kappa tense indicator? The perfect does. Putting all of this information together now, we have the part of this verb lelukamen, perfect, active, indicative, first plural. And a provisional translation would be we, and the perfect showing completion, we have broken. We have broken. The aorist could be translated the same way, and that's a problem with the way we speak English, not a problem with the Greek. Okay. Let's now look at number 7. Number 7 on exercise 5. Eluamen. First thing we ask, what is the lexical entry? The lexical entry is luo. The next thing we ask, is there an augment? Yes, there is an augment. And if there is an augment, then we know that we are indicative mood. Why? Because augment shows past time, and only in the indicative is time an element. That also limits us to one of 3 tenses which can show past time: the imperfect, the aorist, or the pluperfect. Forget pluperfect. Now go to the back part of the verb and identify your personal ending men. What person and number is the ending? Well, first, plural. And what voice is that ending? It's an active voice ending, because that's what we have learned. What is the connecting vowel? The connecting vowel is an omicron. Is there a tense indicator? No, there is no tense indicator. When we have an augment, the present tense stem, and no tense indicator, we are working with the imperfect tense. Remember, the way to identify the imperfect is augment plus the present tense stem and no tense indicator. That's the way you will always be able to identify the imperfect tense. Augment plus the present tense stem, no tense indicator. Now let's translate this verb. Start with the first plural, we, and now we want past time, and the imperfect has the idea of continuation in past time. So it would be, we were breaking. We were breaking. Here the continuation, the ongoing action in past time. Look at number 8. Eluate. What is the lexical entry? The lexical entry is luo. Is there an augment? Yes, there is an augment. And if there is an augment, then we know that it is indicative. Why? Because the augment shows past time, and only in the indicative is time an element. We also know that we're limited to either the imperfect, the aorist, or the pluperfect tense. Forget the pluperfect. Identify the personal ending. The personal ending is second person plural. We also know that that is an active ending. Identify the connecting vowel. The connecting vowel is an epsilon. Is there a tense indicator? No, there's not. We have an augment plus the present tense stem and no tense indicator. What tense is that? Right. Imperfect, active, indicative, second plural. And a provisional translation would be, you plural, were breaking. The imperfect shows continuation in past time. You were breaking. If it were aorist, it would be you broke, or you have broken, or you did break, where we have simple time action. The imperfect usually shows ongoing or continuous action in past time. Look at number 14. Eluon. Lexical entry. The lexical entry is luo. Is there an augment? Yes, there is an augment. And if there is an augment, we know that we are indicative. Why? Because the augment shows past time, and only in the indicative is time an element. We also know that we're working with one of three tenses: the imperfect, the aorist, or the pluperfect. Forget pluperfect. Go to the back part of the verb and let's identify our personal ending. Well, this ending could be either first singular or it could be third plural. And how would we know whether it's first singular or third? Context, right? You'll hear me say that a lot. Context is everything. Context is that which gives anything meaning. Identify, or I beg your pardon, the ending not only is first singular or third plural, but it is also an active ending. Now, identify the connecting vowel, an omicron connecting vowel. Remember, our connecting vowel is an omicron when it is in front of a nu or a mu, and an epsilon everywhere else, unless we're dealing with alpha connecting vowels. Is there a tense indicator? No, there's not. All right. We have an augment plus the present tense stem and no tense indicator. What do we have? Imperfect. Imperfect, active, indicative, first singular, or imperfect, active, indicative, third plural. Now for provisional translation, if this verb were first singular, we would translate it, I was breaking. I was breaking. If this were third plural, we would translate it, they were breaking. They were breaking. Finish exercise 5 through number 53 and check your answers with the answer sheet. My suggestion to you is that you make many copies of these exercises. Even though this material is copyrighted, I do give you permission to make as many copies of the exercises as you would like. And so you have a master copy of the exercise and keep doing them over and over and over again until you get the hang of it.